Welcome to the Web Platform Podcast, a developer discussion that dives deep into all things web. We discuss topics relevant to developing for the modern web and the web platform of today, tomorrow, and beyond. Welcome to the Web Platform Podcast. This is episode number 100, Snowpack and Pika. We are joined today.
Erik, do you want to start over?
Yeah, what'd I do?
What happened? What happened?
Yeah.
What happened? How many? What number did you say this is?
200, I thought.
It sounded like to me. Yeah, you said 100.
It sounded like 300 to me, actually.
All right.
We'll try that one more time.
All right, take two. You want me to do pause first?
Yeah. No, just give it 5 seconds or so.
Are we recording?
Yes.
Yeah. We'll cut.
Okay, breathe. 1, 2, 3.
Wonders of post.
Okay.
Welcome to the web.
I hope you realize all. I hope you realize all of this is going in the intro.
Yeah, this is a live podcast, right?
Oh snap! Oh man!
All right,
It's a live.
Words are hard.
Take three. Words are very hard. Welcome to the Web Platform Podcast. This is episode number 200, Snowpack and Pika, or Pika, however you pronounce that. We are joined today with the lead developer, creator, founder, super humble guy, Fred K. Schott. How are you today, Fred?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. And also on our panel today, we have the return of the almighty, all great Amal Hussein.
Hi everyone. I've had a really crazy year, and I'm so happy to be back. More on this in the future, but for now, Pika.
Woo! Also joined with us today is Danny Blue, as always.
As always, I'm not nearly as exciting.
No, you are the most exciting.
You have the best last name for what it's worth.
You do.
It is a pretty good last name. I will take it. It's very short. It puts me close to the front of the line at school.
It's a color?
Getting ready to go to yeah, it is a color, but it's not one of the more common colors. Because if my last name was white or brown, I'd be like, it's fine. But because it's blue, it stands out.
It certainly does.
It certainly does.
All right, so today we're going to be discussing some really cool topics about builds and tooling and all sorts of fun things. So, Fred, you want to kick us off with telling us a little bit about Pika and kind of how this all came about? What is the Pika ecosystem? Because it's not just one product; it's like a whole set of products.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. To start, it's we try and pronounce it Pika, even though I know that's not the official pronunciation. I learned that Pika is also a horrible disease, so I think it's related to eating dirt. I haven't done my full research on it, but the project is pronounced Pika,
Pika.
like the cute, cuddly kind of mousy creature.
I like that.
It's thanks you guys for having me on. I'm really excited to be on episode 200. It's a project that I really care about. I think I've been working on it for over a year now, and really is a full-time kind of commitment for almost half of that. It goes back quite a bit. It goes back to really trying to explore this new technology that was really new at the time, and now it's pretty out there, pretty baked in, which is ES modules. So for any JavaScript developers out there, I'm sure there are a couple in the audience. That's the import and the export statement. That's now built into JavaScript. So the ability to load dependencies, load other files within JavaScript. That was not super well supported for a long time. It's only until recently that it's kind of been supported at a more ecosystem level. So back when Pika started, this was end of 2018. Pika really just started as a catalog, a place to search for ESM packages on NPM. So this idea that NPM was really node-based, CommonJS-based, CommonJS being that other module system if you use a require function to load something.
Node's old system, right?
Yeah, Node's old system, the one that like a lot of people still use today, and almost all of NPM, certainly at that point, was written for, which meant that it was really hard to bring it into a more future forward-looking kind of ESM-based website. So really, like, we just started as a catalog for web developers, essentially. Like, if you're working on the web, these ESM packages are going to be better. Maybe not 100% of the time, but like by and large, they are more web focused because that's who was publishing ESM at the time. That was really the start of it. We just grew from there in terms of different tools, services, solutions. And now Snowpack is one of our more popular kind of projects, which is a way to use all this new technology, this ESM technology, to like radically change the way you build websites and simplify kind of that whole dev process. So from that really simple idea, we've explored a ton of different things in the last year, and now Snowpack, a CDN, a registry concept. These are all the more kind of promising things that we're working on today.
That sounds really great, Fred. So I know you said that using third-party libraries that are ESM first is better, right? So can you tell us a little bit about why? Maybe obvious to you, but might not be obvious to all of our listeners. So why is it that it's better? And sorry if you have to get into browser internals and networking, but
no, I will do my best not to.
Where it's worth the aside if you need to, right?
Yeah, no, this is why I found the project. This is, I could go on for hours, so stop me if I start going too deep into this. No, that's a really, really good question. At its core, so CommonJS, right, that Node module system. If you just kind of take a step back, it's like, oh, I could choose one, I could choose the other. It's personal preference, right? The reason ESM was created was really to solve this. Well, okay, I might be editing history here, so I'll say more that the reason that ESM is so interesting and why it was so, that better kind of term for web developers is actually back to this fact that CommonJS was written for server side. It was written for Node. It actually is impossible to run in the browser without some sort of tooling like a bundler, like a Webpack. That idea that require, right, is a function, it loads something, but what Node does behind the scenes is it actually goes and takes that string, let's say require React, and it says, okay, where could React live? It could live here, it could live there. This could be the file react.js. Let me look up and down the file tree. So Node does a ton of lookups for each time you load something, which if you try and port that to the browser, right, what would that look like? It would be the browser being like, okay, I'm going to try this file. Okay, it didn't work. I'm going to try this file. Okay, it didn't work. I'm going to try this file, and on and on. It would the application would take forever to load. ESM, on the other hand, was this really baked into into JavaScript itself approach, so that not only was required this function that had to be run to load something, an ESM import statement, on the other hand, is actually something that's built into the language, so the browser can statically go out and without actually running your file, see exactly what you need to load and load all of those things in parallel. So instead of one at a time serially loading things like Node does, ESM is able to just go spread through the tree of everything you depend on, go out, collect those things, and bring them back. All based on URL, like a full file path versus, just looking up by names and these kind of the really obtuse, where could Node be loading this thing from? So as a module system, it's totally web ready, whereas the existing ecosystem by default wasn't. And all of these expensive toolings that we use today, Webpack, Parcel, the whole concept of bundling goes back to really, if you trace it, it goes back to that core deficiency of CommonJS, where we all chose NPM because how great is it to have every JavaScript developer under one roof? But with that choice, the web developers specifically made a bit of a devil's bargain where for all that power, we had to bring bundling into every level of development, production builds. It's no longer just an optimization. It became an actual core part of development.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more on that, Fred. I think what's interesting is, the death of places on the internet like Bower, right?
Right.
That were, specifically targeted towards front-end development. Even if you think about web components and the HTML import spec, right? It's a way to load in files that's specifically for the browser, right? We kind of really lost that with the node migration for front end web development. And I think what's really interesting about what you brought up earlier was that when you said this, what Webpack does, which is kind of create a lot of black magic around require and whatnot, and everything works magically. I think what's so interesting about Webpack is just how much it abstracts, and I think just how much it furthers blurring of the lines between server side and front end JavaScript, as well as just fundamentals, which I think don't allow for developers to really make the best decision given the context of where this code is going to run sometimes. So it's just it's kind of an interesting problem that's, I think, made better and worse with a lot of our modern build tools, right?
I don't know about you guys, but I spend a lot of time fighting with those tools. It's just, it's not just like I write code. It's like I write code, it breaks in Webpack or it breaks in some transpilation or something. It's like, oh my God, now I got to figure this out. These type errors, this Webpack thing. And so I kind of strive for, hey, let's make it simple and go back to the days of, I have a script tag, I have a link with a CSS type, and it's just so simple. It's just you put it into the browser and it works. Hallelujah. And I think ESM modules, especially the dynamic ones that are now built into almost every browser that's supported now, all modern browsers, I should say, because IE11 still sucks for some people. But yeah, that's pretty much. I'm really excited for these projects for those reasons. We can abstract some of that away.
You're describing exactly what makes Snowpack as a project cool, right? It's exactly that. What happens when you can move from CommonJS to ESM? It's not just personal preference. It actually fundamentally changes this power dynamic, really, which is that everyone, no matter their skill level, no matter their needs, has had to grab a bundler. And a bundler is not a simple tool, right? It's a really advanced, it's combining JavaScript files written by thousands of different authors in the ecosystem with, all of these different constraints, and tries to bring them into one single file or, multiple files. It tries to then split it up. The module federation work that Webpack is doing for version 5, these are really complex problems that then the story is, and everyone has to bring this tool into their development workflow. Again, regardless of skill level, day one, web development class, someone getting started, someone who regardless of where you're at in the web development journey, step one is grab this tool that is very complicated. To your point, Next.js, I think, is a great example of that. Power can be really well used. You can server-side render things and have that just be baked into the actual platform. So there's really cool uses of bundling. What Snowpack is really visiting is this requirement without a clear kind of understanding or purpose of needing a bundler to do web development, and bringing that back to just really what it is it's an optimization. I shouldn't need to bundle files together during development. That's a performance story of bringing files together to be fewer requests over the wire, faster in production. But during development, fast development, right? I change a file, it updates that one file. That's a really quick operation. That's not rebuild my entire app every time I make a change. So we get these really cool speed improvements, 50 millisecond startup time. Every time you change a file, it's just as long as it takes to rebuild that one file in Snowpack. It's a really cool story of just performance and speed of iteration that we realize we've left behind with all of this tooling that we brought into the development workflow without understanding why or how we could get rid of it.
So is it fair to say that fundamentally Snowpack is not concerning itself with bundling? It's focused more on, like you said, you are treating bundling as an optimization to be done by tools that know how to do that, while Snowpack is concerned about improving response time and usability during development.
Yeah, it's an interesting, we're a build tool that's all about improving your dev experience. So dev tool might even be a better term there if that helps you think about it. But we let you really easily add a bundler to the end of it, right? So we're not saying like, oh, don't bundle, or like bundling sucks, boo bundling. We're really like, bundling is a great optimization. You should do it in production today, but we treat it as this thing that you can do at the end of your build. So instead of eating that cost every time you make a change, which is a really common thing, you eat that cost of bundling only when you go to deploy to production, which is a much less frequent thing. And by doing that, we send the bundler an already built app, right? At Dev, we're building your application for the web. So your Svelte, your Vue, your JSX, your TypeScript, it all gets built into JavaScript, CSS, HTML, right? These really core languages of the web. So that when you go to connect a bundler, now the bundler just needs to understand JS, HTML, CSS. That's a really easily pluggable concept, where instead of having to combine the idea of bundling with every single build tool you might want to add, we've actually split building and bundling. They're two different concepts now, and they each get simpler as a result. As a result, the bundler is just bundling these three common, well-understood languages. So you don't need to worry about plugins and different loaders and all these different things. It's a pluggable concept where it just optimizes an already built site. Snowpack builds your site. Webpack optimizes it, is a good way to think of it.
That's a good clarification there. I kind of hope that we can get to the point where we slowly reduce the amount of these tools and use them for what they're absolutely needed for, rather than just trust them to do all of the things. So
yeah, our core message that we started with was you should be able to use a bundler because you want to, not because you need to. So Pika.dev, that catalog that we've shipped, that's we do have to be a little bit kind of like wave the flag of unbundled development. So it's been a year now and we don't use a bundler. It's still, you go to the site, you load up the JavaScript in your network panel. It's the exact same files that we're developing for, just shipped to the browser individually. And it works. It's probably a little slower than it could be. And I think we're at the size now where you would want to grab a bundler, right? That production story could be enhanced by a little bit of extra tooling. But we've gotten really far without having to take that complexity off the shelf and bring it into our dev flow.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds amazing. It goes back to fundamentally like picking the right tool for the right problem and knowing what problem you're trying to solve, and not optimizing too early, and and just understanding that there's a lot of waste in our our development workflow, right? There's just a ton of waste in that. And that's costly iteration, like that adds up to dollars and cents really throughout the year.
Right. The web business. Yeah. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah, no. Both from an actual, like, if you want to get nitty, like both from like a resource perspective, right? Like actual like CPU and like bytes and all extra processing that's like unnecessary, but then also like more importantly, like your time, right? Which is key. And like anything to kind of minimize feedback when you're writing software is key, right? And I think that for the mobile community, things like Flutter have come out, and they have things like hot reloading built into writing native code, and it's just blowing the minds of mobile developers that are used to kind of a high compile time, right? So anything we can do to minimize that feedback loop, it just keeps you in the zone, right? And that's like, it's invaluable. Like I think that's like something really difficult to like quantify, right? Like just how important that is. But my question, I guess a related question to all of this is actually, hold on. Before I ask a question, I want to plug something. I worked with my former colleague at Boku, wrote a Webpack plugin called Hard Source. I don't know if it's up to date for the latest version of Webpack, because he's been helping write the performance spec for the newer version of Webpack. So the basically a lot of the performance optimizations for the upcoming versions of Webpack are based off of this plugin, which basically speeds up the local development time, because it just optimizes all the cache chunking and all of that. So we'll link that in the show notes, and I'll also try to link the spec that he created for the performance improvements. So just an FYI. But anyways, are you familiar with that plugin actually, Fred?
No, I've never seen it. That sounds very promising.
Yeah, I think you should check it out.
This idea that like the web is a uncompiled dev target, right? JavaScript runs as you write it, and it runs in the browser. The fact that my fans spin up when I work on a bundled application and that it takes multiple seconds to see a change reflected. That's if that can be solved within the tooling as well as in projects like Snowpack outside of that tooling, that saves developers a ton of time.
Right. Yeah, totally. So now to get to my actual question. So how does Node come in? So Node is kind of, I think they've finalized finally, it just took a while, understandably, but they finalized on what ESM is going to look like in Node land. And so how does that change the story for Snowpack, if at all? What changes?
The people working on that project deserve a ton of respect. I mean, to change a module system of a 10-year-old project at this point, or 10-plus-year-old, the fundamental module system that the whole thing was built on top of. I'm impressed that they've gotten as far as they have. So it's really cool to see that stuff come out and actually start to impact the ecosystem. That's it's not without its troubles. I think people have been feeling the kind of pains of any migration is going to have some pain. So I think it's going to be a bit of a bumpy road to get there. But again, the end result is that dream, right? The NPM promise of one ecosystem for everyone, but without the cost that everyone has to solve problems with expensive tooling. So this idea that as we move NPM towards more of an ESM based ecosystem, it starts to unlock just more and more universal JavaScript, where something you write can run on the web, it can run in Node, it can run on Deno, all these kind of, this idea that Node is not going to be the only JavaScript compile target for long. And we're already starting to see that come out of, come to fruition. The one thing that's really interesting is that, the goal that everyone has had who's been looking at this for a long time is I want to write something, publish it to NPM, download it from NPM, and then it just runs in my browser. I think that goal is still much further off than people think, where what Snowpack's really doing, the kind of magic of Snowpack, is that it takes your NPM dependencies, whether they're ESM or CommonJS, and it essentially bundles them. It essentially takes multiple files within NPM. So React is, multiple files go into what React is. It's not just one file when it's published. That idea of combining them into essentially a single JavaScript file that will run on the web. So part of that is getting CommonJS packages up to ESM standards. But the other part is just, when something's published to NPM, it has a dependency, let's say, React DOM imports React. That's doing that thing where it's importing by name, right? That the browser doesn't know how to look up something by name. So it has to know where that thing is. That's still an install time or a Snowpack kind of install time step that we have to run to get React DOM to point to React. The other is just, again, when you do development, you don't necessarily want 1,000 different files to be loaded in a waterfall. You kind of want to bring those packages together where you can and essentially bundle the dependencies themselves into a smaller number of files. So Snowpack is essentially trying to be that kind of glue between the promise of ESM-based development, which is less tooling, less expensive development. These things that we do, they're either build time or install time, but very few dev time every time you save changes, which just saves you time as a developer. But still trying to combine that with the reality of NPM is just a mix of different things, right? It's going to be a long time before NPM is ever considered a fully ESM ecosystem. And so we have to, the goal would be that NPM, finally gets there and Snowpack goes away, or at least that part of Snowpack goes away. But we're still pretty far away off from that future.
So what if, just bear with me here, what if there was no NPM?
Ooh.
What if we wanted to just publish
blasphemy
to a CDN, right?
Mm-hmm.
And let's say you have one config file and it puts everything up there. Because a lot of the modules we're pulling in now, you'll have, if you look at Deno and how that works, right? You see a lot of the examples, they'll have full qualified URLs. So it'll be HTTPS, blah, blah, blah. And then you pull it in. What if we could do that and we were smart about our components, where we grouped our components together by whatever makes the most sense for our projects?
Yeah, that is a very exciting future. I think that, oh my God, yeah. There's a couple things there, right? I think the one is a recognition of what is changing to make that future possible. Again, it's easy to say ESM as a web friendly, ESM deserves a new kind of ecosystem, maybe you could say, but really I think what we're looking at is and Deno really playing this out of, I want to import by URL. All of a sudden, that could be anywhere in the world. That does not have to be today, which is, import by React. That's a word that means something very special in NPM that is going to go and load it from NPM. Today you're really locked into that just by virtue of how long NPM has been kind of entrenched in that node resolution. Moving towards ESM and moving towards something with URLs totally democratizes where you can load that code from. So you can load it from NPM, you can load it from a fully resolved URL, which points to our CDN. You can point to your favorite CDN, you can point to a local CDN. It's a really interesting change to the model of what you're able to do with JavaScript and where you're able to load code from.
Yeah, I mean, we can host entire websites on S3 now. We can do, I remember when I first looked at Firebase hosting and DivShot. I was really into DivShot when that was around. Then that got acquired by Google and got absorbed into Firebase. But it was so great because all you do is you put up a config. You have like a CLI tool you use to do certain operations, and the config will have stuff that like security things for your app, and you just push it up, and it's very simple. There's not like a ton of things to know.
Yeah,
but you could get more complex if you added things. It was really interesting. That got me started on all of this. So.
Yeah. I think the next NPM doesn't look like NPM today. And what I mean by that is I think we're still all thinking of packages as these things that need to be installed and unpacked, and Yarn with their plug and play, NPM with their Tink, PNPM. It's all about like, how can you take these packages and optimize for that use case? But the idea of a package feels very, when you spend as much time as I do in this ESM world, you start to realize, what is the value of the package anymore, right? I want to import this JavaScript by URL. I want to import the JavaScript itself. Give me the JavaScript. The package is just a wrapper for the tooling to understand.
Yeah, and the obvious glaring pain with that is, well, HTTP2 helps us a lot, where we have multiple requests back and forth, and reduces the latency a lot, especially on mobile. But there's a point where it's going to reach diminishing returns. You don't want like 100 ESM modules pulling from your website.
Yeah.
So there is some planning and some thought that needs to go into that. And I think tooling like Snowpack, which is helping us sort of wean off of the entire ecosystem of everything gets built all the time, is definitely a really fantastic step forward.
Yeah, that's what you're describing. Like, that's the thing, that in dev, you actually can have 1,000 ESM modules if you really wanted to, right? If each one loaded with a millisecond because it's coming from your local file system, go wild. But yeah, it's that production story that's still not really there for yet. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so I think what's really interesting about hearing you both talk about this magical world that I want to live in is I think things like dynamic imports really kind of queue up very nicely this type of architecture of like on-demand module loading, and I can see a world where through trusted sources, things like iframes even go away, right? If you need to dynamically load content from like a totally different third party, like I could see, loading in another website or a sub page from anywhere in the world, just through a URL. So, I mean, that sounds really exciting, I think.
Yeah, it's now there are definitely some drawbacks to that, right? Like, import from URL, the URL goes down. Oh no, I've like encoded my install step into my JavaScript.
Yeah, it's a great point, but you can work with that, right? You can figure out like things like that.
Yeah, don't worry. I'm not saying that's a reason not to. But it's a really interesting different dynamic where you're actually encoding the install logic into your code. And is that a good idea? URLs are not meant to be permanent. What happens there with maintenance and different things? Longevity is a really interesting question.
Yeah. So Fred, I have a follow-up question that's a little bit in the weeds, but I think it's important to kind of surface this. But anyway, so I'll ask it. I hope it doesn't confuse you and others.
I will try my best.
Okay, cool. So earlier you said that import React, that namespace, it really kind of does tie with NPM, right? And so I just want to clarify my understanding of that. Like, are you talking about just like the module resolution in Node and how that whole thing works essentially? Like, can you just kind of clarify what you meant by that?
Yeah, sure. It's kind of everything. It's conceptually, technically, when you see a code snippet in a code base and it says import React, what you're telling Node is when I see that, go and load that from node modules / React. And when I have in my package JSON, dependencies React, and I've given it some sort of version that I want to install. It's all of these implicit connections to a npm-based ecosystem where React lives in your node modules directory. It lives at node modules / React / package JSON. You load that file. You look up the entry point. It's all of these workflows that have been built up, and to be fair, it's all things that have helped developers, in their ease of use of how they use the npm ecosystem. But what that means is that any sort of workflow today, and you see this with, what's a good example of this? If anyone wants to build a system like PNPM or like Yarn, where you're trying to change the ecosystem in some way, like you're trying to optimize and have all your packages in one place, they're not actually in your folder, they're somewhere else.
Workspaces, I think, a good example.
Yeah, that's an even better one, right? What workspaces are doing is they are faking how npm installs your packages, and not just npm the CLI, but how npm installs the packages that were published to npm and how a package looks and how a package behaves. So Node and npm are really, they came up together, they grew up together with a really deep integration. Is a package JSON, is that a Node concept or an npm concept? It's technically both. Both players in that game have a say of how that package should structure and should work. So the two are really tied together in more ways than I think we all realize. And then conceptually that trickles down to just, if I see import React in a code snippet, I assume, okay, great, I have to install React from npm, and I have to go through a different kind of outside tool workflow to get that package where it needs to be for my whole program to run.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. Thank you so much for clarifying that. That's what I thought you meant, right? Like those, like the implicit kind of, like all the assumes, right? That are just, they're so ingrained. We don't really even think about them, but we are really tied. Like we have heavily worn out this cow path that is, like
yes, we are.
File and module resolution structures and all that stuff. But
yeah,
just really quickly before we move on, I just want to give a shout out. So the latest version of the npm CLI, the up and coming version, which is version 7, actually is going to have support for workspaces, which is really exciting. So that work has been going on the CLI team for a few months now, and most of it's happening in the public. I mean, I think all of it. It's all open source, and there's a proposal as well for what the workspaces with npm is going to look like. A lot of it's heavily influenced already, from Yarn. There's a desire to not want to deviate too much from the community or create confusion. So there's a lot of really good collaboration that's actually happening, and so we'll link to that proposal in the show notes, so y'all can check that out. And you can even build the latest version of the CLI locally if you wanted to preview pre-release CLI. So,
on the note of what you were talking about earlier, as far as npm and package JSON, and there's projects like Unpackage, which are amazing, like to use if you want to pull in absolute URLs and try approaches like that you can test this now and see if this works in your application, because it basically copies npm and puts a URL for each version of that node module. So if you want the node module, you can just pull it in via URL. But obviously, as we spoke about earlier, some of these things might be in CommonJS. They might have both. So just be aware of that if you're playing with these. How does something like Pika Package, which is also part of the Pika universe, plug into to all this?
Yeah, that's a good question. So Pika, and I want to make sure, because again, we're a big umbrella that a lot of different projects live under. Pika Package. Which one are you referring to there?
So the one with web modules. I listened to an episode of I think it was Shop Talk Show. Maybe Drew was on there or you were on there, talking about Pika Package, which sets up a web modules folder. If I'm not mistaken, tell me if I'm wrong.
So yeah, he could have been talking about a couple. So Snowpack is the project that creates that web modules folder. So essentially what we do is we take your whole npm dependency tree and we take node modules, which is thousands of files, and we turn that into web modules, which is a different folder.
Yep.
But that every package that you rely on is essentially a single JS file. What he could be speaking about was the CDN, where we're essentially taking that same kind of concept of, right, you mentioned Unpackage, which is this great resource where it's essentially like a one-to-one of everything in a package hosted on the web. We're doing something similar, but with a bit of a different approach. It's a much more kind of Snowpack-oriented approach where instead of trying to copy, again, the package contents one-to-one on the web,
right,
what we do is we actually try to expose the package itself, again, as a minimal one file kind of download. So again, React, right, is a package of many files on Unpackage, but on our CDN, it's just a single JS file. So
right.
Import React loads a single JS file. It's fast. It's really, we take away all the complexity of, okay, what's inside my dependency tree? Again, if you go one-to-one on files, what you run into is that every file is published differently. CommonJS, ESM, there's packages with like literal Svelte code inside of it. There's no rules in npm, which is part of the power and part of the growth, but also it makes it really hard to build anything web driven that doesn't do some sort of tooling. And the level of tooling we've brought is that every package becomes a single JS file. So you can import any package regardless of how it was written using that ESM, using that import statement, and you get the package code. So going back to that, like, I see import React in a README, and I have to know implicitly that I go around and install React separately. Instead, imagine that a README snippet just has import React from our CDN. And all of a sudden, you have a snippet that you can run anywhere. You can get rid of all the implicit understandings and all of the other steps you might need to do. And a JavaScript snippet just becomes something that you can run anywhere without any extra work.
Yeah, because the CDN project is very interesting to me too. I really like that approach. So what I was trying to do, I was trying to figure out, is there a way to publish to the CDN, right? Without using something like the node modules.
Yeah, so we had also around late last year, and this is what I probably spent most of my time on last year, was this idea of, npm is a legacy ecosystem. Yeah. It is an ecosystem that has 10 years of history. It was built for a different module system. It was built for a different time. We should try to experiment with something new, totally greenfield. What does that look like? Something ESM-based, web-driven. And we did a ton of work about how would that look and trying to solve problems for the package maintainer. And you publish here and it exists at a URL. A lot of the same ideas from the CDN, to the point where we realized that essentially we were just duplicating the work that we were already doing for the CDN. We essentially created two different places to load code from. One that was NPM based and one that was registry based. A totally new greenfield registry. And the feedback we got was this registry is cool, but I still want to publish things to NPM, right? That's where all my users are. So that project is kind of morphed and almost being folded into the CDN, where maybe one day we'll be able to support, I want more people to be working on alternate registries. But at the end of the day, the problem we couldn't get over is package authors want to publish to where their users are. And that is still NPM. So the registry concept and this idea of publishing to a new place has kind of just been folded into publish it to NPM. And now our CDN is good enough that we can load it with all the features that we were promising for a greenfield a greenfield registry. We can support, taking that package and shipping it as web-ready code that can be loaded from a URL. It turns out we don't actually need the greenfield approach to give you the exact same things we were promising. As a what makes a web registry very cool.
Okay, thank you.
That sounds really cool, Fred. I just want to make a really quick point. It's I think between the four of us that are having this conversation, it's an obvious thing, but it might not be obvious to everyone. So I just want to say that iteration is just part of the process here, and it's really important to understand that projects like NPM, like Fred said, super old. They're at this point legacy. And, there's a lot of decisions kind of, we can look at now and criticize, but, hindsight 2020, right? So I think it's just really important to know that like everything is an iteration and we're constantly evolving and trying to improve. But it's really important that we sometimes even design things badly because like learn from those mistakes.
Oh my God, yes.
Know why, right? So ultimately, like kind of pain is as much part of the process as success, and it really helps drive like what's next. And so with that said, I think Danny has a question for you that's like a good segue.
Yeah, no, I mean that is such a good point though. I definitely, whenever I say stuff like that, it's like NPM is this incredible platform, right? Like the fact that we have this one place that anyone can load code is amazing. So I get to be kind of this, like, I get to poke a lot of different projects and say like, what if we did this different? But that never is like with the intention of like, yeah, NPM, Webpack, these are projects that have gotten web development to where it is today. They're like such key parts of the ecosystem we live in. And yeah, nothing but respect to the people working on that and the projects that they've built so far.
Yeah, absolutely. And to criticize is not to like, to love is to criticize, right?
Yes,
like,
yes.
And so ultimately, we all just want the best thing, and we're all standing on the shoulders of giants, like so many giants. So many projects have influenced Webpack. If you think about Browserify, you think about JSM and or JSPM, I think that was called. So anyways, just there's so much talent in web dev, and it's really humbling. So
totally.
Yeah. So like Amal said, kind of talking about, like you look back to figure out what people have done. You figure out, like the good things. You figure out what's bad. Like this is coming up even in different. I know, like we've been talking about, like staying away from bundlers and stuff. But like this is this sort of thing even happens in the world of bundlers, where it's like people are like, well, why are you like even things like roll up and or anything else, like why not just contribute back to Webpack? Why do something new? Things like that. And sometimes you have to step away a little bit to be able to play around with some of these things. So you've mentioned the CDN, and we've talked a bit about kind of how Snowpack fits into the development ecosystem. Erik mentioned at the very beginning that this is like that it's not just one thing. There's a bunch of different stuff going on. So what is the future of Pika, of Snowpack, of these tools? Like what are some of the cool things that are coming? What are some of the cool things that that you all are thinking about?
Yeah, I mean that's the big question as a project that just gets to explore this space, and this very new space, right? We're essentially year one of what does unbundled web first JavaScript look like, and living in a world of year 10 Webpack bundled Browserify, right? It's a different model, so there's a lot to kind of play with and uncover here. It's all greenfield. It's all very new and exciting. I think the big thing that we're looking at for Snowpack is we still live in this world, right, where we have to assume we take your dependencies from node modules and we turn them into web-friendly web modules. What that means is that you have to run npm install, and then essentially Snowpack has to do work on top of that. So we haven't really left that workflow yet. We're still just a thing that you do after you npm install. What I'm most excited about is this idea that once you have these web CDNs or registries or whatever they are that exist for you to pull from, combining that with a tool like Snowpack becomes really interesting, where we can essentially manage your dependencies for you without you having to reach for npm directly. The packages and the code, it all still lives on npm, but essentially we could pull the code down at runtime, cache it locally, and now because we were basically given web-ready code from the registry, from the CDN, we can now just run that in your project. So this, again, it's that idea of like an install step even as a kind of core thing that you need to do, versus I just want to point to these resources and I want a dev environment that as I go, loads them, caches them, and then now can serve them back to me. So it's just kind of the bridging of the two concepts together. They're kind of both, the CDN and Snowpack are skating to the same world, where less tooling means just less friction, less steps that you need to do as a developer, and way more pulling code as you need it, building things as you need them without having to go and rebuild or reinstall or do these larger tooling steps as a part of your fast iterative development.
That's the dream.
Yeah, that's the
exciting
dream. There's a lot to get there, though. It's.
Yeah.
I think the idea of putting I'm still not convinced on having a URL in my code base. I think Deno, for example, has had a lot of not trouble, but like I've definitely seen friction when people try to understand that concept of I want to import my dependency. So I want to import, let's say, this is the problem. I don't know any good Deno packages, but package foo. What was that?
Oak.
OAK?
Yep.
Okay, great. I want to import Oak in my project. Does that mean I put the full URL every time I want to import it? And then the answer from Deno would be, no, actually, we really like this idea of having a deps.ts file, which is just like literally you've created a map that is a TypeScript file that converts URL to kind of full object. It puts the URL in one place so you can just say import Oak from this file inside your project. But then that's like, okay, well, now I have like my package JSON is now just living in a TypeScript file instead of a JSON file. Is that really a step in the right direction? Import maps are kind of an interesting concept that starts to explore this from a platform space. I don't know the answer, to be honest. I think it's all up for discussion at the moment, but there's just a lot to explore in the space that is going to get ironed out. We're at year one, so it's a really exciting time to explore and try and find these answers.
Yeah, so Fred, that sounds amazing. So if folks want to get involved with Pika, I guess, is everything open source? If not, like what is an open source? Can you tell us a bit about that? And I guess what's the team look like now? Is it are folks just contributing at an ad hoc basis, via like a standard open source project, or are there dedicated like people working on this besides you? I guess what does the team or the contributor map look like as well?
Yeah, great question. I mean, we are very open source. This all started as an open source project, and that has not left us. So Snowpack, I'd say if you want to get involved, Snowpack is definitely probably the most exciting place to get involved as a contributor, but also I'd say is probably our most lively, high impact project where we're seeing a ton of use of that. And it's having a big just like impact on at least how I do web development, and we've seen it in a lot of other people as well. The services are a little more kind of, we're running those as services. So the CDN code is not open source right now. We're trying to pull things out of that can be. Although you'd be surprised just like how much of that exists. We're kind of connecting existing tools there. So there's not too much proprietary magic that we're working on in that. It's really Snowpack, I'd say, is our main focus right now as an open source project. And yeah, it's totally contributor driven. So we take proposals and features as they come. We're really kind of at this moment just looking at what is not working for people, what are people asking for, and letting that drive our roadmap. So it's been a really organic kind of conversation that's led to the roadmap today. Drew Powers has been working full time on this now with me for about a month. So he is awesome. He's actually been a really big part of ES Next Conf and getting that kicked off. That's a conference that we're putting on in July. Totally remote. All the proceeds go to fighting COVID. It's a really exciting, just a chance to look at all these things that we're exploring and that other people are exploring too, bringing them all under one conference that's focused on the future of JavaScript, the future of the web. And we're getting ready to announce that speaker list today. So probably by the time this is up, that'll be out there. So definitely go check that out. Drew has been an incredible part of that and making that happen.
That's so cool. We're going to link to ES Conf in the show notes as well. And so I'm now like, I've been like, life has been so intensely crazy and busy for me lately. But I'm kind of bummed that I didn't even know about this conference until like today, hearing from Erik, about it from Erik. Is it free to attend or I guess it's a donation? I'm assuming like it's a suggested donation amount or something like that.
Yeah, there is a ticket price, but all of that money, all the proceeds that we raise are going, directly to both kind of global efforts to fight COVID, so the WHO and other charities, and then also speakers get the chance to choose a local community charity. So something just locally in their community that's helping, and whether that's a food bank, whether that's just anything really to help their local community. So there is a ticket price. That's just to kind of raise that funds. At the end of the day, what we're trying to do is is support local communities fighting this thing.
That's amazing. Thank you all for doing that. So yeah, I guess if folks want to get in touch with you and want to find you on the internet, like what's the best place to reach you, Fred?
Everything I do on Twitter is at Fred K. Schott. So that's my name, FredKSchott. Pika has its own Twitter handle, which is a little just more like if you want to stay up to date with what the project's doing. Much more just kind of update based versus like stream of thought. So that's at Pika Package, Pika PKG. And yeah, everything we do is on GitHub, so you can find us there as well, Pika PKG at GitHub.
And is there an RFC process? I forgot to ask that. Is there like a formal RFC process for features or feature requests?
There is not, and there should be. No, at this point, we just have a discussion board. So we're kind of experimenting with this discussion place where you can just kind of leave a comment that isn't an issue. And we've been using that to flesh out features kind of as they get requested. But no, that would be, if anyone has any experience putting one of those together, that's definitely a great example of a contribution in terms of what that process could look like more formally.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon to talk about this. We just talked about Dino. I think the last episode that we released. So there are a lot of different. So we've been thinking about this sort of thing for a little bit. So it's really nice to be able to talk to somebody that knows these sorts of details so intimately.
Oh, thank you guys for having me on. It was my pleasure.
Yeah. And also I want to thank, we mentioned at the beginning of the episode that this was our episode 200, and we've been doing this. Yeah, we've been doing this for, I can't even remember. I think we started in 2014. That might be right. I honestly, I would have to go look to figure it out. But thank you to all of the listeners. Thank you for everybody who interacts with us on Twitter, who suggests guests, and just who listens. Hopefully, we'll keep going for a good bit longer past this. And yeah, just thank everybody. Thank you everybody for listening to this episode all about Snowpack, and thank you for listening for the past 200 episodes.
Yeah, totally ditto on that. And actually, before we go, I just really want to say I'm so honored to have you for guest number 200, Fred. And I really just want to say thank you for being brave enough to challenge the status quo. You know what I mean? That is so underrated. It is not easy to say, hey, I think we can do it better, to a bunch of web developers that are always trying to be 2 steps ahead of you. It's a big thing to challenge and bring up new ideas and try to shift the conversation in this community. And I just really appreciate that you and your team have taken this really important issue on. It's one of those things that it's such a nuanced problem, and it's so intersectional, and it affects so many things, from end performance production, performance, to developer workflows. It's a wide gamut of things. And so I think in a few years, we're going to look back at this project, and I think see it as a very pivotal thing that's, I think, helped hopefully shape a better web. So thank you all, really.
Oh, thank you so much for saying that. Yeah, that's true. I mean, we are definitely standing on the shoulders of giants with everything that we do. So the fact that we're able to challenge the status quo at all is just I'm honored as well. But thank you for saying that.
Absolutely.
All right, folks, this sounds like a great spot to end it. We'll talk to everybody next time.